Hey folks, welcome to the first Trash or Treasure video of 2023, and what a way to start too, by briefly returning to Platinum Games, who I dedicated an entire marathon for throughout 2017 and early 2018, including the first two Bayonetta titles. But now, after 8 years since the second one released, we finally got the long-awaited third entry in the series, with some controversy on the side. Hold your horses, we'll get there, I promise. In some sort of strange coincidence, Bayonetta 3's announcement trailer was uploaded literally 3 weeks after I did my Bayonetta 2 review back in late 2017, and it was certainly a puzzling trailer. It showed off Bayonetta kicking ass like she always does, but this time she actually loses the battle and gets herself killed, so what's going on here? The director of the second Bayonetta, Yusuke Hashimoto, whose role I mistakenly thought was Hideki Kamiya's again when I did that video, talked about having all sorts of ideas for Bayonetta 3 and a potential spin-off title, which is most likely where the recently announced Cereza and the Lost Demon game originated. Quick side note, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily hyped up for this, but it looks totally harmless. I'm sure I'll pick it up and review it someday. This one just may not be of high priority during 2023, especially if it's going for the same price as an actual Bayonetta game, god damn. I was a lot more excited for Bayonetta 3 coming out, but there was a lot of silence throughout its 5 years since being announced. Occasionally on a Nintendo Direct we might hear something about it, but a follow-up trailer didn't get shown until 2021. That's a long ass time before finally giving us anything, but hey, could be worse. We've barely heard a peep about Metroid Prime 4 since that also got teased in 2017. And where's that Prime Trilogy port? We're all waiting for it, we know it's likely done, just give it to us already. I'll sell my firstborn if I have to. This trailer also gave us a brief glimpse of Bayonetta's new voice, no longer played by Helena Taylor from the previous two games, but instead replaced by Jennifer Hale, which I think is a pretty good fit for the Umbra Witch. She doesn't sound too far off from the original voice. The dialogue's still on very early Devil May Cry levels, but Hale captures Bayonetta's mannerisms and personality almost flawlessly. I can definitely tell it's her from time to time and not the Bayonetta I'm used to, but that's only because I've been familiar with Hale's work for so many years now that I can just pick up on it. As many of you likely know at this point, however, only a couple of weeks before Bayonetta 3 finally released, Helena Taylor uploaded a series of videos on Twitter explaining why she refused to voice Bayonetta this go around. Ah yes, it's finally time. Oh boy, where do I even begin? Okay, so the initial reason Taylor decided not to show up was because she claimed Platinum only offered her a $4,000 deal to do the whole game, which is insultingly low given how hard voice actors have to work and how their pay grades are already hit or miss. Taylor then begged people to boycott the game and stick it to Platinum, which influenced a lot of people to cancel their pre-orders, assuming what Taylor said was true, and not helping Platinum's case was Hideki Kamiya blocking anybody giving him and the rest of the staff grief, turning his little inside joke into a malicious one. Jennifer Hale unfortunately also bore the brunt of a lot of criticism and abuse from the information people were given, just like what happened with Laura Bailey and The Last of Us Part 2. Because yeah, they're totally to blame for all this drama. God bless her though, Hale put out as much of a professional statement as she possibly could on Twitter, encouraging players to go in with an open mind and appreciate the hard work by the staff at Platinum Games, even getting support from former colleagues like David Hayter and Steve Bloom. Eventually, Platinum themselves would provide a counter-argument against Helena Taylor, saying that she was offered $3,000 to $4,000 per recording session out of a total of 5, summing up to at least $15,000 for 5 days of work. Sure enough, Taylor was caught out on this by Jason Schreier of Bloomberg News, and Platinum appeared to be telling the truth, immediately turning all of Taylor's supporters against her and with many people regretting canceling their purchase. Taylor of course responded to this, confirming that she skipped out on a couple of details, saying that she was first offered $10,000, which she still thought was too low, but Platinum really wanted her to voice Bayonetta again, so put an extra $5,000 on the table to try and entice her. I could only assume that's a typo on her tweet and she's not asking for $50,000 because that would be insane. Even before Platinum made their statements though, there were a couple of things in the videos Taylor posted that didn't quite sit right with me. Firstly, there was this part here.
Bayonetta franchise made an approximated $450 million. That's not including merchandise.
Okay, so Bayonetta games have always been critically acclaimed and well loved by fans, but they were never big money makers, even with the original title making its way across several different platforms, and also considering that the second Bayonetta to this day is still a Nintendo exclusive, and we know how much they like sharing their properties, so where did this $450 million figure come from exactly? For reference, the first Bayonetta only sold around 1.7 million copies as of 2018, and the second sold just barely over a million as of 2021, a large part of the latter being thanks to the Switch port. The Wii U version didn't even get half of that amount. Those are pretty decent numbers, but not even close to $450 million worth. But even if that was somehow true, the other thing that raised an eyebrow for me was when Taylor said this.
They now have a new girl voicing her over. And I love actors, I wish her all the joy in the world. I wish her all the jobs, but she has no right to say she is the voice of Bayonetta. I created that voice. She has no right to sign merchandise as Bayonetta.
Now that to me is a little unreasonable. Just because you voiced a character doesn't mean you own said character. It'd be like if Veronica Taylor said no one else can voice Ash Ketchum because she called Bagsy. Nah 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 nah. As much as I do want to believe Helena Taylor and her predicament, all of the evidence does seem to circle back to her. Nothing she's saying appears to be correct, and she's effectively killed her career with a single tweet thread. She hasn't done any voice acting since Bayonetta 2 either, so to ask for more than $15,000 to come back seems a bit greedy. It sucks it had to come to this, but you have to be respectable and fair in that line of business. Taylor seems to mostly do theater work, so maybe she'll be better off in that field, but I doubt any video game developers will be hiring her anytime soon, especially since one of the charities she recommended you spend your hard-earned cash on instead of Bayonetta 3 was for anti-abortion, which opened up a whole can of worms in of itself. This entire situation did unfortunately leave a lot of bad taste in people's mouths, but Bayonetta 3 doesn't seem to be dwindling in sales at the moment. If anything, this controversy might have actually helped boost them. I promise we will get to the actual game soon, but I just want to quickly mention that I went back to the other two games in preparation for this video, though can I still recommend them even years after doing both of my reviews? Yeah, of course. To start with the original Bayonetta, I wasn't really the biggest fan of it during my first couple of playthroughs, but I recently did a new one on the PC version and I've come to appreciate it a little more, whilst having some old and new problems. QuickTime events can still go straight to the depths of Inferno for potentially ruining your overall grade if you mess up, no matter how well you do, and I swear the PC version never gives you enough time to mash the button for the climaxes. I've tried using my index finger, pressing the button before it happens, recalling my Metal Gear torture training. Nothing was working, and it was pissing me off because I missed out on so many Halos and didn't give me the full satisfaction from beating a difficult boss. And speaking of difficulty, this game still gets hard as balls during the second half of the game, mostly from witch time being pretty finicky to activate, but I now understand that it's all to do with the timing of your dodge maneuver. The tighter the window, the more likely you'll activate witch time, and the longer you have it on. So okay, I can get by that, but it still often feels like late game enemies and bosses rarely ever let you use witch time, diminishing its entire purpose for a portion of the game. There are also a few missions that just straight up never let you take a quick moment to breathe. The biggest culprit being Chapter 14, where Bayonetta has to ride a missile towards Baldur's base, which goes on forever and is very easy to lose health. And then you have a boss fight against Jean with 3 whole phases to it. It is insane how much it asks you to do all at once. In all of my playthroughs for Bayonetta 1, this was the mission I died the most amount of times on. My advice would be to look up a guide on finding every one of the game's witch hearts and moon pearls to permanently extend your health and magic, so that you can last longer in the field. That and a number of these expansions can be fairly cryptic to find to begin with. This game has a bad habit of forcing you to trek back to a certain point in the level for an Alpine that you might spend a good 30 to 40 minutes continuously failing to beat, or it could be something ridiculous like shooting a specific object to open up another Alpine, or having to use a torture attack to kill the last enemy in a wave. This is a 2009 game by the way, and yet the upgrades and LPs needed for new weapons feel about as hidden as an old NES game. Still, I'd overall say my thoughts on the original Bayonetta are a little kinder than they used to be. Maybe the Devil May Cry marathon I did had taught me a few techniques after reviewing this game, but my journey was more pleasant than I remembered it being. It does get crazy hard at points, and I've wanted to tear my hair out with how punishing deaths can be to your total results. But much like Devil May Cry, the feeling of annihilating your enemies in a stylish and over-the-top manner never gets old for me when I'm actually able to pull it off. It's just those first couple of playthroughs that might give you a slightly sour experience if you're not at all familiar with spectacle fighters. It took me a few full runs to truly appreciate the original Bayonetta, which you thankfully don't need to worry about when it comes to the second game. This one still kicks so much ass 8 years later, and now we have the Switch version to make it even better. Witch time's way more reliable than it was previously, climaxes are less straining to pull off, Umbran climaxes still rock, Alfheim's new weapons and upgrades are much easier to find this time, and the shorter length means easier replayability. Bayonetta herself just feels a bit smoother to control too. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it took a short while for me to get used to how she handled in the original game, whereas no matter how much time passed in between my Bayonetta 2 sessions, I can get back into the groove no problem. Everything seems faster in the second game and I have a great time with it, no doubt more so than the first game, though I have discovered a couple more issues upon revisiting this. Putting aside how uninteresting the story is to me and how annoying Loki can be, the pacing sorta slows down around the middle and drags the game somewhat. Inferno itself looks pretty intimidating, but there's not much going on with these levels, and the ones that call back to Bayonetta 1 with this other Umbran witch can go on for an unnecessarily long time. The game does get awesome again once you're past these sections, but that's a fair chunk of the experience that doesn't quite hold up as well as other parts. In Bayonetta 1, you were always moving, even if you weren't fighting enemies. The adrenaline was constantly there and you didn't want it to stop, whether it's dodging a boss, avoiding obstacles, or escaping from crumbling architecture. I know I was complaining about Chapter 14 earlier for its non-stop mayhem, but even that level had a consistent pace. However, Bayonetta 2 has a few moments where there's not a lot in your way outside of some minor platforming and real-time cutscenes that sorta kills the momentum for a little bit. The other thing that didn't really bother me at first, but has since rubbed me slightly the wrong way, was how similar Bayonetta 2 is to the first game. And I'm not just talking about repeating moments in areas that were already done before. The UI's mostly the same, a lot of the battle animations are the same, and even the level structure is much of the same thing. 5 years passed since the first title, so to borrow this many assets does invoke a lot of deja vu, especially if you're playing both games back to back like I did recently before moving on to the third entry. Still, I had a great time with this one too. It may be easier than the original Bayonetta, but it's not so easy that you'll just breeze through the whole thing. I'd say the challenge is about average, and my god, that opening chapter is still absolutely friggin' incredible. Bayonetta 1's difficulty has its perks too, and it feels great getting a decent grade at the end of a stage when you bash your head against a brick wall enough times. However, quirks like the quick time events, upgrades that are too well hidden, and enemy introductions giving you less than a second to react once they're done just ever so slightly lowers my opinion on the original game. If you do enjoy your high-speed spectacle fighters though and want a game that's on par with something like Devil May Cry, the two Bayonetta titles have got you covered and I cannot recommend them enough. But let's finally start talking about the third one, shall we? We should probably begin with the story, but since this game's still very much new at this time, I'll try to keep the spoilers light. Though honestly, with Bayonetta 3's plot, I just do not give a damn. I've never really been that big on the narratives for Bayonetta titles. It's usually the gameplay that's the saving grace of the whole thing, which I normally take precedent over an engaging story, but by the third go around I was really hoping for something a lot more entertaining, and Bayonetta 3 sadly does not deliver on that. This is probably the worst of the plots to date, and the opening cutscene takes 25 goddamn minutes to get through before engaging in your first battle. What the shit? You're not a JRPG, just get to the action already. I don't know why this keeps happening with the Bayonetta series where they're more interested in showing us all of these cool moves we can't do in the actual game, but they went next level with this one. Anyway, we start off with Bayonetta back in her original outfit, battling a being known as Singularity who wants to bring destruction to the world, and Bayonetta actually loses this fight and gets killed off, much to the dismay of this new character named Viola, who we won't get much clarification on until way too late in the game. By the orders of this guy Sigurd, who you might want to remember by the way because I totally forgot about him until Jean manages to find him again right near the end of the story. They sure do love playing the long game in this outing. Sigurd gives Viola the Tesseract anyway just before he gets killed by Singularity as well, which lets her teleport out of there just before she suffers the same fate. Then we suddenly cut to Bayonetta alive and well in New York, torturing Enzo once more and now giving herself the same hairstyle she had back when she was Cereza in the first game, which took some getting used to for me, and it's kinda hard to unsee this little girl you've known doing all these provocative dance moves and getting naked whilst monsters appear from her hair. I did eventually grow numb to the idea and just accepted it for what it is, but if it really does bother you, Bayonetta 3 does introduce a filter to remove some of the nudity and a couple of other minor details that might be disturbing to others. Also never thought I'd see Bayonetta in casual clothing for once. It's kinda bizarre. Spoke too soon. Gotta overdress her again on a big ass cruise ship before a giant tsunami appears by the new villains of this game, the homunculi, who even kill Enzo's wife and kids, leaving him a broken father and husband, so that's kinda messed up for a joke character. During this, Viola appears out of thin air, requesting that Enzo brings her to Bayonetta, and as everybody hides out in Rodon's bar temporarily, Viola tells them that the homunculi are scattered across the multiverse. Everybody's gotta have one, don't they? Oh dear, 3 games in and we're already playing the multiverse card. The idea you have when there are no other ideas left, because much like time travel, multiverses are extremely easy to mess up. Not to mention having been overdone at this point across media lately. I can think of very few examples that manage to pull off the multiverse concept well, but a lot of the time it's shaky at best. In this case, Viola says the homunculi have already destroyed a large number of universes, with only a few remaining, requesting that Jean finds this dimension's version of Sigurd, while Bayonetta helps Viola find all of these Chaos Gears that Sigurd knows how to use and beat Singularity in his proclaimed Alphaverse. And folks, that is pretty much 90% of the plot right there. Just Bayonetta, Viola, and I guess Jean going through 4 various universes, each with their own version of Bayonetta who gets their asses killed by demons too, similar to the beginning of the game. This in turn not only makes me wonder how they keep losing despite looking clearly capable of defending themselves, but also how the Bayonetta we're playing as survives for as long as she does. What makes this one so special? To make things extra weird, all of these parallel Bayonettas are each from different countries with radically different designs, like a J-pop one in Tokyo, a war general in China, or an Egyptian princess in Cairo. My favorite's gotta be French Bayonetta in Paris though. I love the magician outfit she's got on and how creative battles can get thanks to a magic hat she carries. I was thinking with how the game forces you to play the Japanese Bayonetta early on that all of these other Bayonettas were going to be extra characters to play as with their own movesets. But no, this is the only time that happens, and I'm not really sure why they bothered. I mean, playing as 5 different characters does sound like it'd get overly complicated. I just thought it was strange, that's all. But man, this story gets so repetitive in a short amount of time. Once I saw Chinese Bayonetta get axed off and acquired the second Chaos Gear, I was like, oh no, this is going to be the whole game, isn't it? And sadly, my hunch was right. This holds true to Viola and Jean as well. Jean especially has next to no bearing on the story. I honestly don't even know why she's here. Yeah, she's trying to find this universe's version of Sigurd, but that's her entire role throughout almost all the game's runtime, which is particularly sad when they already did her dirty by having her out of a lot of the second game. Jean is playable once you complete the game for the first time, and that's cool, but I would have loved for her to have more to do earlier on and not go through all of this spy infiltration stuff. We'll tackle that later. As for Viola, she's just there for some very lame comic relief when we already not have one, but 2 other characters that are also the comic relief, Luca and Nenzo. At the very least, she can actually fend for herself with her katana and her trusty demon friend Cheshire. So out of the side characters in this series, Viola's probably the best one just for that alone. But again, I really wish there was more to her than just being yet another verbal punching bag for Bayonetta. That's something else that's recycled from the other games. In the first one, Bayonetta would always tease Luca by calling him Cheshire, and in the second she would keep referring to Loki as Little One. This time Bayonetta gives Viola the nickname of Kitty, where once again the side character has to earn the right for Bayonetta to call them by their real name. And it's fine I guess, but god am I dumb with the stories for these games now, and honestly I'm kinda glad this is the grand finale of the series. There are hints of more entries coming in the form of Viola if the ending's anything to judge that on, which I suppose I'd be open to the idea, but these stories and characters need to be further developed, because I could only watch Bayonetta doing awesome tricks and quipping for so long without wondering if there's anything else to her. Devil May Cry was sort of similar in these aspects for me, where the stories weren't really the most well written and also relied on wit pretty heavily, but those games at least provided some unforgettable characters and interactions between them, especially when it came to Dante and Virgil. 3 games into the Bayonetta series, I don't think I could tell you what sort of characters everyone is, including the titular one. What can I say about Jean? Well, she's very cocky and has a sharp tongue. Okay, what about Rodin? He's very cocky and has a sharp tongue. Okay, what about Luca? He's very cocky and has a sharp tongue, but also cares for kids. You see what I'm getting at here? There's not much. Bayonetta herself might see the most amount of growth in these games, but even she doesn't get enough to work with. Make them have a craving for pizza or something, I don't know, just anything to make me care about these people outside of how cool they are. And while on the subject of the ending earlier, let's talk about that real quick because I have questions. Skip to this point in the video if you don't want to know what happens, but seriously, it's not fantastic stuff anyway, so proceed with caution. Okay, so eventually Jean finds Dr. Sigurd in her escapades and reunites with Bayonetta and Viola so they can access the Alphaverse where Singularity is. But it turns out Sigurd has been Singularity the whole time and even kills poor Jean in the most anticlimactic fashion. So Bayonetta and Luca, who can now transform into a wolf due to other versions of Luca dying across the multiverse. Don't ask me how that works, I don't think even the game can tell you. battle Singularity for a long ass time, and then we get the Bayonettas from the last 2 games joining the fight Spider-Man No Way Home style, establishing that those titles took place in different universes, but that can't be surely. Bayonetta 2 often called back to the first game's story. All events in that game have happened, unless this is just the past, present, and future versions of Bayonetta? Does the Bayonetta we're playing as even recall what happened during her previous adventures? It's all not very clear, and while these Bayonettas provide a great amount of assistance against Singularity, the current Bayonetta still ends up dead by her own demon that she loses control over from being so exhausted. Yeah, Bayonetta straight up dies here, quite unspectacularly too, and is dragged to Inferno, losing against the most boring villain in this entire series. But to make matters more confusing, right at the very last minute there's a sudden romance that blooms between Bayonetta and Luca. Friggin' Luca, of all people. The two people who had zero chemistry and were constantly making fun of each other to no end, mostly Bayonetta to Luca, and now suddenly these two were sharing a kiss like they were always in love. Much to the dismay of Viola, who turns out to be Bayonetta's and Luca's daughter in another universe and continuously fails to save them. What the shit is even going on anymore? So now Viola is the new Bayonetta after staying in this universe to go to school and kick ass for Rodin in the Gates of Hell. Oh my god, what a mess. I didn't buy anything that was happening in this closing chapter for a minute. It was super forced and made very little sense. What a way for Bayonetta to go out in her final journey. If they ever do any more games in this series, I really hope Platinum finds some decent writers to create a better story, because this ain't it, Chief. But I may be looking into the story a bit too deeply. After all, Bayonetta's never really been about the plot, but more so how good it feels to beat up some angels and demons with nothing but your fists and monster hair that needs way too much conditioner. So how does this third installment at least compare in terms of gameplay to the other two? Thankfully, this is where Bayonetta 3 begins to shine much brighter. Abusing witch time by dodging at the precise moment is still here and just as satisfying to pull off as before, laying the smackdown on enemies in the allotted amount of slowdown, all while using a full arsenal of different weapons you pick up along the way. What also gets in your way are a whole bunch of collectibles in each chapter that you can find by exploring the levels, such as figurines, music, tarot cards, and of course witch hearts and moon pearls to permanently expand your health and magic. I'm not kidding, there's a shit ton of stuff to find in this game. And the levels are way larger than they were previously, almost giving off an open world feel to them. But goddamn, can these stages take for friggin' ever to clear? I mean, just look at these times. Chapter 9, Jesus, this was long. Just an utter marathon of bad guys, puzzle solving, and multi-phase boss fights happening all at once. The only other one that sorta matched that length was the final level that seemed like it was never going to end with so many subsequent and climactic battles. If that wasn't enough, there's even more levels you can unlock by finding and catching 3 animals in each chapter carrying Umbran Tears of Blood. Bayonetta 3 is a pretty lengthy game for what it is, around 15 to 20 hours depending on your exploration. It's no doubt the most extensive title to date, and the amount of tools Bayonetta can experiment with is crazy, between new weapons, accessories, and demons to watch your back, some of which can be unlocked by doing those extra levels from gathering Umbran Tears. I'm pretty sure what I've got now isn't even everything the game has to offer. I think my favorite weapon ended up being the yo-yos, nice and fast, had good range, and did decent damage. But I quite like Tartarus too when it's not busy scaring Japanese high school teenagers shooting themselves in the head. And no, I won't provide context for that. This thing packs a wall up just on its own, but one upgrade you can get for it is turning into a freaking Gatling gun that just chews through enemies' health with unlimited ammo. I love it, and one pretty neat thing about all these weapons is that they can change Bayonetta into different forms by dashing, which surprisingly have some functionality to each of them. The spider form, for instance, lets her climb up walls for a very short time, as well as being able to web swing wherever you want to go. The frog form allows Bayonetta to jump tremendously high for hard to reach places, and the bird form gives her a gliding ability that she can use for an extremely long time. Talking of weapons and upgrading, however, this game has like 3 different types of currency to power up Bayonetta herself. Halos still do exist from previous games, but they've been vastly reduced to buying different sets of costumes and colors, unlocking more the further you get into the game. The color swapping's nothing too special, but it's inoffensive, and the various costumes you get is okay. It's just a way to be able to control the parallel Bayonettas you meet throughout the plot without actually getting to play as them. One of the other 2 currencies that are more important are Lotus Seeds, which you'll need a lot of to purchase accessories from Rodin that once again offer perks at the cost of only being able to equip 2 accessories at once, as well as buy Bayonetta's old guns and any remaining witch hearts and moon pearls that are surprisingly easy to acquire the maximum amount of this time. But finally, there's orbs you earn upon clearing waves of enemies to be used in a new skill tree system that works pretty much how you would expect it to. This provides your standard extra moves to Bayonetta and her plethora of weapons, on top of the new Demon Slave system where she can summon her giant friends by simply pressing the left trigger by default. Something you may notice is that there aren't any Umbran climaxes from the second game, Bayonetta's devil trigger basically, the thing that briefly drained your magic whilst buffing up your attacks immensely. That has been completely removed in Bayonetta 3 in favor of her demon pals that follow your commands as you move them around and attack enemies really damn hard, but at the expense of leaving Bayonetta literally naked and defenseless while she keeps the demons in the field with her dancing. It's also weirdly the only way to inflict torture attacks in this game if you stagger enemies with the demons, which is a lot harder to pull off now than it was before. I'm kinda on the fence about this whole Demon Slave mechanic. On the one hand, seeing Bayonetta's demons have more of a role in gameplay outside of ending a boss is neat, and I like using them as a combo finisher to deal that little extra damage. But on the other hand, I don't like how exposed Bayonetta herself is to enemies, and I'm not talking about the amount of skin she's showing. Bayonetta's stuck in place like an absolute moron while her demons are out, leaving you very much open to attacks and a lot more likely to lose your no damage bonus for your final grade. Well, Madama Butterfly, you really are the mistress of atrocity.
I'm pretty sure that's what Platinum calls Helena Taylor these days too.
I mean, if that does happen, you can always once again go back to the main menu before the battle stops and then start over. And mercifully, despite the chapters being pretty long in this game, you can go back to a certain point and change the outcome of those particular encounters. So there's ways around getting pure platinum grades more easily. Hell, not even dying ruins anything this time. You can lose as often as you want and still get a pretty decent result by the end, which is great, but I do get pretty annoyed when I immediately get hit by using one of Bayonetta's demons and I'm no longer in control of her actions. That feels pretty cheat to me. Handling your demons in combat is actually based on a cancelled action RPG from Platinum called Scalebound, which sorta looks like a Monster Hunter ripoff with the Platinum touch to it, but they would use a similar concept for one of their later games, Astral Chain, where you worked for the police and used different beasts chained to your arm to catch criminals. Gotta be honest, wasn't the biggest fan of that game despite many people loving the hell out of it. I'll go back to reviewing more of Platinum's work someday, including this one, because they've had some more up and downs within the last few years and are probably worth talking about. That can come some other time though. But back to the Demon Slaves, they thankfully have their own health to worry about instead of sharing Bayonetta's, but I'm also not crazy about how slow and delayed their attacks can be, which is a big problem in a frantic spectacle fighter like this one. I get that they're utter giants and will naturally not be as quick, and the damage output is fairly good, although I can't help but notice that Bayonetta's attacks have become a bit weaker than before, which suggests to me that Platinum really wants you to use the Demon Slaves. That's probably going to be a turnoff for some longtime fans just on its own, and you'll only get the most out of these demons by purchasing more moves for them in the menus, as well as spending moon pearls to increase your magic and have them stay in the field longer. Which you may be wondering, didn't magic automatically increase in other games once you collected both halves of moon pearls? Why do you have to do it manually this time, and with the witch hearts as well? Well, I wondered that at first too, but that was until I discovered that Bayonetta 3 also offers a few levels to Viola as a new character to play as with her own type of gameplay. And by that, I mean Metal Gear Rising's. Yeah, there isn't really a better way to describe Viola's style of combat. If you play Metal Gear Rising, then Viola feels almost exactly like Raiden, minus cutting at any conceivable angle and being the worst chiropractor ever. Sadly though, this fighting style doesn't quite work at its fullest when it comes to Bayonetta's kind of gameplay, and that all comes down to the way Viola parries her attacks similar to Raiden, which isn't nearly as reliable as it was in Metal Gear Rising, despite that also being developed by Platinum Games. Rising felt a lot more snappy with its parry system and even telegraphed enemy attacks with different colors depending if the attack can be parried to begin with. If it was red, you could block and deflect that attack, but if it was yellow, then it isn't and you would have to dodge out of the way somehow. Bayonetta 3 really needed something like this when it came to Viola in my opinion. Enemy attacks appear way too fast for her to keep up the parrying, and Bayonetta games are generally all about dodging and using witch time to your advantage. Now Viola does have her own form of witch time by parrying, but only doing so at the precise moment will give you enough seconds to pull off a combo. Otherwise you'll find yourself having less witch time than it's taken me to finish this part of the sentence, so what's even the goddamn point? I actually found putting on the Muna Mahakala accessory provided more fruitful results by pressing the analog stick in the direction of the enemy's attack. It didn't always give me witch time, but I was at least more easily safe from harm. Viola also doesn't get any more artillery than what she starts with, except for her own form of devil trigger that she gets later in the story, which is useful, but I don't often find the time to use it because the recharge rate is so slow, and that goes for Bayonetta as well. All Viola has at her disposal is her katana, these kunai knives she throws instead instead of firing guns, and the one demon friend she can summon, Cheshire, who acts much like Bayonetta's demons, only Cheshire will act on his own accord while Viola uses punches and kicks that still hurt quite a bit. Now this I actually prefer to the way it's handled with Bayonetta. It keeps the flow going and gets a few enemies off your back while you're dealing with something else. I like it, but aside from that, Viola just can't quite match Bayonetta's maneuverability and speed. She tries, bless her heart, and she's not awful to play as, but it just seems like she belongs in a whole other game. Ugh, well this is annoying. Just as I've been working on this video, an update came out last month that tweaks Viola's gameplay a tad, amongst other minor changes that make the overall experience a bit easier to manage, such as less strict stipulations during Alfheims, bug fixes, and opening up the picture book as soon as you access the Gates of Hell, carrying a playable demo of Cereza and the Lost Demon. That last one's a pretty darn cool reward, kinda reminds me of when Crash Bandicoot Warped and the original Spyro had secret demos of each other's games. I wish that came back more often. Hasn't really increased my excitement for the upcoming Bayonetta Origins game, but I appreciate Platinum putting it in here. Anyway, one of the major additions to this update is Viola's increased parry window to make deflecting attacks easier to pull off, though I personally didn't notice too much of a difference, but the fact that it's being addressed at all is something I'm grateful for. Other than that, she's basically the same as she was pre-update. Apparently, the overall difficulty's been slightly adjusted as well for all levels, not just Viola's, but I'm not a skilled enough player to notice these kinds of things. I admire the efforts in Platinum listening to criticism, but I just don't really find Viola's gameplay that well suited for this style of spectacle fighting. She feels more restricted than Bayonetta's free-flowing nature, though I've already gone into this in great detail as is, so I'll leave things here. Still, I'd rather deal with her levels than Jean's. Oh, poor Jean. 3 games in and she still gets jit for some proper levels dedicated to her. Oh, you can play as Jean, make no mistake, but instead of traditional stages with tons of enemies to fight, minor platforming, and puzzles, we get these lame-ass James Bond-style espionage missions where sneaking is the aim of the game, but getting caught doesn't do jack to your progress, so why even have it at all? They're just a little too basic for my liking, and it's the first pure Platinum trophy I've ever earned in my life at the end, so yay, what a hollow victory. You get a couple of bosses thrown in to spice things up a bit, and Jean's final mission has you shoot up bad guys on a motorbike with everything in the friggin' world trying to hit you, but these sections were just not that entertaining, and the stealth aspect is incredibly undercooked, especially since shooting the enemies with guns you find is much more practical. Like I mentioned earlier, you can still play as her in the actual stages after finishing the game, but that's too little too late for me, and by the way, don't label her segments as side missions when they're necessary to continue the story. As for the game itself, I have to say this is probably the weakest one in the series for me. But don't get me wrong, it's still Bayonetta at its core and has some amazing moments. Chapter 12 verse 9 being an absolute highlight for me. I won't say what happens in it, but this part truly was incredible. It was fun, exciting, epic, and gave me a lot of Fifth Element vibes, a movie I adore to pieces. There's so much to collect in this game too that completing it 100% is gonna take some time. But geez, the idea of doing multiple playthroughs of this game sounds a little exhausting. The level size and volume of small trinkets may be just slightly too large for the game's own good. It's like Platinum tried to squeeze a bit of Nier Automata into this new Bayonetta title, but Bayonetta is much more fast-paced than Nier Automata, so it does feel somewhat out of place as a result. Something you can get used to, but definitely unusual. Graphically, Bayonetta 3 looks pretty good for the Switch, though I think this and No More Heroes 3 are perfect examples of the hybrid console showing its age. Some parts look quite jaggy for a 2022 title, and even the frame rate's taken a bit of a hit compared to before. Not by much, and it doesn't really ruin the gameplay, but it is sometimes noticeable. The Switch just can't keep up with games of today anymore, at least not without some serious compromises a la The Witcher 3, Nier Automata, Persona 5 Royal, or the many games using a cloud service that nobody wants. I mean, I'm never expecting PS5 levels of graphics here, but there's only so much the Switch can handle before becoming an outdated system, which to some it already is. I've already talked about the story to hell and back and how it's not very good, as well as the Viola and Jean gameplay needing more time in the oven, but luckily Bayonetta sees the most amount of action compared to those two, which she should do. I'm certainly glad I invested all of my found witch hearts and moon pearls to Bayonetta, since I figured I was going to be playing as her the most. Do I think I'd come back to this game multiple times to get the most out of it? Absolutely, and I want to stress that I really did have a good time with Bayonetta 3, and I'm so happy it finally exists. I just may end up going back to the other two entries more often due to all the problems piling up on each other in this third outing. You do get your money's worth for sure. $50 to $60 isn't too bad of an asking price, I would say, but I'd still suggest waiting for a sale if you're not certain about this game after everything I've talked about. So far, sales aren't doing too badly though. Still makes me wonder if the initial controversy had anything to do about it. But I hope you do enjoy Bayonetta 3 if you decide to pick it up. Now Platinum, please, oh please make a Wonderful 102, I'm begging you. It's been 10 years since the first game came out, you reached your Kickstarter goal and then some for the remaster. Come on, it's time. Do I have to drop a bag of flaming poop to Helena Taylor's porch? I'll do it, I swear.
Well, until that day comes, I suppose we should wrap up this long-ass video and move on to our next game for 2023. We're very close to the Resident Evil 4 remake coming out, so I'd better get a move on with that series and talk about the last of the classic titles, Resident Evil 0, before we discuss the original Resident Evil 4 afterwards. With that said, have a happy 2023 and hope to see you for more. Thanks everybody for watching, stay safe, So... What, you were just gonna leave us after you were done? Yeah, man, what the hell? You put us in the video for like 2 seconds and that's it? Well, I wasn't really intending on using you guys that much for this review. You kidding? You know how much it costs for interdimensional travel? A lot dollars. Don't you mean a lot of dollars? No, I mean a lot dollars. We don't use specific numbers where I'm from. We just say, hey, this thing costs a lot dollars. How does that even work? Alright, fine. Let's go get some McDonald's or something. Ooh, I want a big box of chicky nuggies. God, please don't tell me I talk like that all the time in your universe. Come on, let's go. I don't want the Big and Tasties to run out of sauce again. Trash or Treasure video of 2023. Bit my tongue there, ow. What a way to start too, by briefly returning to Platinum Games, who I used briefly twice. Start too by briefly returning to Platinum Games, who I damn it, I used briefly twice again. Hope you all have a happy, with that said, you all have a happy